Hey guys, it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and this could be better. Alright, so this looks a bit better, but this does not. Obviously, I'm not going to leave it like this, so in this video, let's build some storage to better organize my sister's garage.
So now that the space is empty, let's go over the game plan. The old open shelves looked cluttered and messy, so we'll replace that storage with some cabinets to keep things neatly organized and hidden behind doors. My brother-in-law also wanted some kind of a table to work at, so I'll add a simple storage tote workbench here in the middle. Then, because why not, let's add some additional storage above and a place to hang his tools. On the far left side, I wanted to add a small open shelf for quick grab things like shoes and dog leashes, and of course, a little more storage at the top. So with the plan in mind, I headed to the shop to start building. Because it's the quickest and easiest part, I started with the storage tote workbench first. Those storage tote shelves are pretty popular lately for garage organization, and I thought it would be neat to use that same concept, but for a mobile workbench. So I started by cutting down 2x4s to build the frame. From this, I screwed together 2 frames, one for the front and one for the back. Then I added another 2x4 down the center of each frame to split them into 2 sections. In one section, I plan to add 2 larger 27-gallon totes, and in the other, I plan to add 3 smaller 14-gallon totes. So on one side, I screwed 3 2x4s between the frames spaced apart a little over the height of the smaller totes, and in the other side, I screwed 2 2x4s spaced apart a little over the height of the larger totes. I found it easiest to install these while the frames were on their sides, then I could flip it over, make sure that the totes would actually fit, and added the other supports on the other sides at the same locations. To make this mobile, I flipped it over and added casters around the bottom. Then I cut a piece of 3/4 inch plywood to fit on top and screwed this in from the bottom side. And with that, this workbench was finished and I rolled it aside to work on the cabinets. Now the cabinets that I built for this project are super simple, nothing fancy or complicated. So I started by cutting down 3/4 inch birch plywood to build the cabinet boxes from. A toe kick isn't necessary here, but I went ahead and notched out the front bottom corner of the 2 tall sides to make one. The 2 taller cabinet boxes needed 2 tall sides, a bottom, top, and middle panel, and 2 back supports. Then I drilled pocket holes to assemble. To keep things simple, I made these cabinets frameless, and because they're going into a garage and I was planning to paint them, I opted not to apply edge banding to the front edges of these cabinet boxes. I'll discuss that a little more later. Inside these cabinets, I plan to add adjustable shelves at the top, but at the bottom, my brother-in-law had asked if I would add some pull-out shelves like I did for my parents when I built cabinets for their garage last year. So I cut some plywood scrap strips to glue and screw into the bottom section of the cabinet to mount the drawer slides onto. Now you may be wondering why I needed spacer blocks here since there's no face frame, and it's because the slides will bump into the doors once they're installed unless I wanted to use specialty hinges, which I didn't. Once the slides were installed, I cut a 1/4 inch plywood panel to staple onto the back side of each cabinet. Then I started building the pull-out shelves. I cut 2.5-inch wide strips from the plywood to make the sides of these shelves. These are basically just really shallow drawers, so I cut 4 pieces to make each box. I was somewhat regretting my decision to not edgeband the front of these cabinets, so Bubs and I took the time to edgeband the tops of these pieces for the shelves. Why? Honestly, I don't know. Regret makes you do irrational things sometimes. But once that was done, I simply screwed these sides together with wood screws at each corner. Now, I debated cutting dados in these pieces to install the 1/4-inch plywood bottoms, but I decided to simply glue and staple them onto the bottom instead since they're so shallow. I don't regret that decision, and if you're curious if these bottoms will hold any weight, they will. I made the drawers in my workbench the exact same way, and I stood in those just to test them out, and they're fine. Anyway, after the shelves were together, I installed them into the cabinets, again with Bub's very helpful assistance. Next, I drilled shelf pin holes into the top section of each cabinet to be able to add basic adjustable shelves into the top. Then, before I forgot, I cut a piece of plywood to nail across the toe kick of each cabinet. To wrap up these cabinets, I cut 2 3/4-inch plywood shelves and 2 3/4-inch plywood doors for each cabinet. I'll install these after they're painted, so for now, I just moved on to building the 2 upper cabinets. The first upper cabinet was made of 2 long top and bottom panels, 2 shorter side panels, a middle divider, and 2 back supports. This cabinet will go above the workbench, so I built this about 1/4 inch wider than the top of my workbench. That way, there's a little wiggle room once everything's installed to be able to slide the bench into. I assembled this cabinet box using pocket holes and screws in the top, bottom, and back supports, and just simple wood screws in the middle divider. Then I double checked that this box was just slightly longer than my workbench top, and thankfully I didn't screw that up. The second cabinet was even simpler. I built it exactly the same, only without a middle divider, because this one was only about 36 inches wide.
All right, so I've got the workbench, the 2 tall pantry cabinets, and then there's gonna be an upper cabinet that's gonna go above the workbench. And I've got this little cabinet over here that will go to the left. And I cut the doors. I cut 4 doors for this upper cabinet and 2 doors for this upper cabinet. They're right over here on my workbench. So I did not apply iron-on edge banding to the fronts of the cabinet. So I thought, well, I'm gonna be painting and it's going in a garage. Edge banding is incredibly time consuming, and so I didn't spend time doing it for the fronts of the cabinets because they'll mostly be covered by the doors because the doors are like a full overlay. But I did edge band the sides of these tall doors. I don't think I'm going to edge band the sides of the small doors because after edge banding these, I just can't mentally take it. We'll prime, sand, paint. I think it'll be fine for what it is. If you wanted to edge band, feel free. I edge banded the drawers inside the cabinets. Why? I do not know. I don't know why I did that. We'll just paint the rest and it'll be what it is.
So with all of my pieces cut, sanded, and assembled, I started the dreaded finishing process. I applied a coat of primer to everything, sanded, and then added 2 coats of paint, sanding between each one. Now, full transparency, the plywood edges that were not banded were not pretty after painting, despite me sanding them multiple times. If I'm honest, I knew that they wouldn't be, but I was just kind of hoping to be proven wrong. I can't say that this would have been worth the extra time to have edge banded everything, since it's just going in a garage, but I will say that if this had been on anything other than a garage cabinet, I would have definitely gone back and applied it. I'll just let this be a reminder for next time that this is what happens when you get in a hurry. But moving on, once the paint was dry, I went back to add the doors. I installed 4 doors into the larger upper cabinet And I installed 2 doors on the smaller upper cabinet. For the big doors, I added 3 hinges on each one, making sure that the middle hinge was below the shelf and the bottom hinge was above the pull-out shelf. That way these hinges won't interfere with anything going on in the cabinet. Then I added some simple black knobs and pulls to finish these cabinets up. Before loading everything up to take to my sister's, I made one more thing, a pegboard panel to go above the workbench. For this, I pocket hole screwed together some scrap plywood strips to make a frame, then I cut and screwed a piece of pegboard to go on top. This pegboard was recycled from an old project and it had already been painted green, so I gave it a few coats of black paint so it would fit in with these gray cabinets a little better. And at that point, we're ready to get all of this stuff installed.
Alright, so I didn't film this because it's hard to get the camera in. Everything's super crowded, but I attached it to the wall studs through this top back support, and there's another support back here I could have attached to the wall, but there's this weird trim on the wall and it was hard to get a shim back in there, so I just didn't because I couldn't, like I said, get the shims, but it's not going anywhere.
We got the far right cabinet in place first, then we added the large upper cabinet next to it, securing it to the wall studs through the back supports, then securing it to the tall cabinet through the side panels. Next, I added the pegboard, again, securing to the wall studs, and then we added the second tall cabinet. I didn't have the wood with me at the time of installation, but these trim pieces on the wall were about 1/4 inch thick, so I plan to go home and rip some thin strips of 1/4 inch plywood to slide behind the cabinets in the middle to use as a shim to be able to secure through the middle back supports. I can always come back later and add a few extra screws. Finally, we hung the small upper cabinet, rolled in the tote storage workbench, then added a small shelving unit and a few finishing touches. I had cut a dog bone shaped piece of plywood with hooks to give my sister somewhere to hang all of her dog's leashes and other things. I also cut a piece of plywood to mount the battery chargers on over the workbench. I did this for my dad in their garage remodel last year, and my brother-in-law wanted one too. And with that, these cabinets, shelves, and workbench were ready to fill up and get put to good use. All in all, this was a super simple to build project, but it made such a huge difference in this space. Much more efficient storage, a work surface, and a place to hang tools. I'm really happy with this upgrade, and I think they are too. If you're interested in upgrading your own garage space, I've got the printable plans for the cabinets and the workbench available in the description below. I hope you guys enjoyed watching the transformation, and if you can't wait to see more, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on all of the projects coming up next. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!